Hello there. As you may well know, or are coming to grips with, becoming a good player in many of the competitive games out there requires a lot of dedication and lots of practice. Even if it takes a few months to get to the higher elos, for some people, odds are they've had experience in older game titles that require similar skill sets. A player who is new to, say, FPS games may find it takes them multiple seasons to get to a high level, but for someone who's already had 10 to 15 years of experience in previous games, may find it only takes 1 or 2 seasons, especially if they were in high elo in those previous games. However, I find with myself, my friends, and many other people who are striving to become better through learning and practice, they find themselves having to relearn those matchups and scenarios that they've already covered or experienced. So, in this video, I'm going to be covering some of the areas and give some tips on how to commit that practice that you've been doing into memory. Remember, I just like to talk about this stuff. I'm not a professional in any way. If you need professional help, go talk to a doctor. Let's get on with the video, shall we? First, I'd like to start by just saying that you don't need to remember every single detail. You don't need to remember what to do specifically for every single matchup. You don't need to remember every minute detail and niche strategy of every map, situation, or scenario. To be successful, you just need to have good fundamentals, know the broad strokes of strategies, and how to adapt to changing situations. Those three things are the keys to help get you going. Don't stress about all the little things. Select and focus on what matters to you and what you need to improve on. Now, before we get into these tips, I'd like you guys to keep these things in mind as we're going through them. 1. You need to put mental value into your practice before you use these tips. If you're not interested in getting better, or you find the activity of practice and learning boring, these tips just won't be as effective. 2. Everybody is going to find their own way of committing stuff to memory. Some may be better at talking about it, like myself. Others may be better doing it in action. Others might find it easier to write stuff down, or maybe even a mixture of all those things. You need to have an individual plan. Don't just blindly follow these tips and expect them to just work. Experiment. See what happens. Make your own version. And lastly, there are many different tips out there. I unfortunately won't be able to cover them all in one video, so I urge you to look for others that I haven't mentioned if these tips aren't working out for you. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into them, shall we? Now, this might be a method that most of you will recognise. After all, it is the most common way of creating habits and acquiring game knowledge to get an edge in matches. However, a lot of people think that the repetition method is just do something a lot, or even worse, just play a lot and you'll be better. Whilst there is some truth to those statements, it's a little more nuanced than what you would come to expect. Committing knowledge to memory is a process called potentiation, in which, in theory, is where the more frequent signals are passed in the synapses in your brain, these signals are created by doing any action or thinking any thought, the stronger those synapses become, which in turn consolidates that knowledge into memory. However, the brain can become fatigued, looks much like that of muscles. By playing a lot over a long period of time, you're essentially sabotaging your future self by wasting time, as you're forgetting what you're trying to practice in the first place. Think back to when you crammed revision for an exam. If it was more than a week ago, whether you passed or failed, do you remember what was covered? Likely, you don't, because up to 75% of the material is lost from memory if you've crammed the previous night, according to Doyle and, I'm going to butcher this name, Zakarjek. Whilst playing a game and studying are not the same thing, the principle is the same. If you're doing a marathon of games to get experience, it doesn't give long-term results. It impacts your mental health and ultimately doesn't get you anywhere. Instead of just playing, You should instead distribute this practice and play over a longer period of time. Whether it's a day to learn a new concept, character, map or deck, or over a month or two to completely master a role in a game, you're not committing more time to practice through this, rather you're just spreading it out over a longer period of time, and in some cases even condensing it from a great quantity of practice to a great quality of practice. Here's a few examples of this in action. Most, if not all of these, at most take about 10 to 20 minutes. In Mobas, you can practice farming before going into ranked matches to warm up. In first-person shooter games, you can go into your practice tool, examine spray patterns, or practice your aim in a controlled environment. In collectible card games, you can read up on some of the meta decks and come up with ways of beating them. In any game where there are characters with different toolkits, you can read up on the matches and how to beat them before going into a game. This is especially true for difficult matchups. By distributing and enhancing the quality of this practice, not only will it become more effective, but it'll also be more engaging, as it frees up more time for you to just actually enjoy the game. Let's look at teaching. Now, this method I prefer the most, as I find it easier to talk about things even more so than executing the action. There's a famous saying which reads, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." The core meaning of this saying is that if you fully understand the concept, you can easily break it down into simplified steps that anyone can understand. However, this doesn't mean that you can't learn new concepts and skills via teaching. A lot of people think that creating guides, teaching and coaching others as a method of self-improving is only available to those who are already at a higher skill level. In reality, this is far from the case. If you're new to a game or you're struggling, you just have to approach this method from a different angle. When doing this method from the viewpoint of the novice, instead of passing on knowledge with the intent of teaching, try to share what you learned. If you have a good game, share what you did in order to win. If you've had a bad game, share the scenario with other people and then tell them what you think you could have done differently. By doing this, not only are you committing valuable information to memory from your own understandings, but you're also gaining knowledge from other more experienced people. It's a win-win all around. If you're in a situation where you can't tell anyone, the simple act of preparing what you've noted down as if you are going to teach it is also just as good, because the simple act of writing it down can commit more of that knowledge to memory. This is what's known as the protege effect, and works via increasing metacognitive processing. This is you becoming more actively aware of your learning and your practice. It gives increased motivation to practice yourself and increased feelings of competence and autonomy by allowing yourself to view yourself as the role of the teacher or the mentor rather than that of the student. It's also been shown to improve motor learning and enhance information processing. However, there are a couple of caveats to this method though. The more realistic the teaching, the better, and please don't use this method when playing ranked matches, especially team-based ones. When doing this method, consider that ranked matches are a test of your skill and a way to create that material for you to then learn from, instead of an active way to teach others. Lastly, let's look at how you're sleeping. Seriously, if you're tired right now after a long session and you have nothing important to do, take a nap or even turn in for the night. This runs partly into what I mentioned in the first point about distributed practice. However, sleep plays a major factor in memory, specifically consolidation. This is where the brain preserves key memories whilst discarding any excess information that would otherwise be useless. Not getting enough sleep can lower your learning and memory abilities by up to 40% according to the Sleep Foundation. Getting enough sleep helps you process the newly acquired information that you gained during your practice, but in the long run, sleep can also help you tilt less, as this memory consolidation also processes emotional memories too, which in turn reduces your stress, takes care of your mental well-being, and improves your attention and concentration. That said, too much sleep can also lead to cognitive impairments. Everyone should strive for a balanced amount of sleep, which is usually in the 7 to 9 hour range for a full sleep and 26 to 60 minutes for a nap. Too little, and your body and mind won't have enough time to process the information. Too much, and you build up what's called sleep inertia, which can lead to identical problems as sleep deprivation for up to 3 hours. A few ways to avoid the sleep inertia is to either get some good old-fashioned caffeine in you. That's probably the most obvious option. But if you want to avoid excess caffeine, other ways of trying to avoid this is to find a way to quickly make your fingers cold, or creating a way to expose yourself to a slowly brightening light source. The bottom line for this method is simple. The more you take care of yourself, the better you'll perform and the faster you will climb. That's it for this video. Next time we'll be covering an important topic: how to deal with griefers, cheaters, and toxicity. You don't have to sub or like the video, just as long as you're taking care of yourself, that's all I ask. I hope to see you again soon.